Okay, so this section is also going to be shared publicly. So if you have more detailed questions, let's save it for the unrecorded or the recorded just for our internal red team. But I wanted to share this for blue team so that they would know what to expect as well, right? So there has been a lot of questions about this pen testing part, right? How we're going to do that. What is supposedly the workflow, and yeah, and basically people were sort of the people who were more aware of the ramifications of the different rule sets, right? They were sort of bringing up potential issues with how we're going to do it, and it's true. And that's why for people who have identified those issues, please take note of that, right? For instance, if you find a rule that's like, hey, that's kind of really conflicting with some of our other goals for the competition, please note that and capture that so we can aggregate all of that data that we have for the results of this competition, and then we can give that to the organizers and hopefully come up with better rules that will improve the red team part of our competition. And that's what we've been doing every year here for the Cyberforce, right? We've been involving the red teaming part, so it keeps on getting better, and it shows the value it can actually give, you know, both for our red teaming volunteers and also for the blue teaming students, right? So one of the big ones is, you know, for most people, they're asking about what's allowed and what they should do for this external pen testing. So I'm going to give you some of our, so I talked with some of my other leadership counterparts, and these are things that we plan on doing, right? To hopefully set the tone that we are not, we do not run in the same manner or sort of the same intentions as other red teaming, blue team competitions. Here at the Cyberforce competitions, it's completely different. So for instance, we're not testing blue teaming on the ability of them killing connections. We feel like that is just a very easy skill set, right? But for these kind of competitions, it's a very powerful thing to do. And also, we might have some plays where we're testing the blue teaming to firewall very specific stuff and to configure their firewall in a very specific manner so that it shows that they have a real understanding of how firewall works and how they should configure it in a real world manner versus how it's usually done, I feel like, in these competitions where they configure their firewall to optimize their ability of scoring points, which is different from actually securing their system, right? In a perfect competition, your ability of getting points and how secure your system are in a real world manner are the same thing. But what happens in these competitions in a lot of cases is due to the scoring metrics, it is at odds with real world security activities. So the blue teaming system ends up optimized for maximizing points, but not maximizing how secure their system is in a real world context. So these are two big change. So number one, we're not grading them on their ability of killing connections. And so how are we going to do that, right? So on Friday is the check-in day. Saturday is the competition. Friday is the check-in day. So on the check-in day, what we're going to have them do is Red Team has full control over the Windows 2016 VM. What Red Team is going to do on that check-in day, right? So before the actual competition on Saturday, we're going to pop a shell. We're going to create a shell on that Windows 2016, and then we're going to tell Blue Team, hey, Blue Team, find out what the shell is and kill that shell. Excuse me. They're going to kill that shell. And so, good. So basically on that check-in day, we've demonstrated that the blue team has that skill of killing that shell, right? We don't need to test that anymore. We verified that on Friday. And this is the other important aspect that blue team needs to be aware of red team. So on the red teaming side, what we did was we were able to get on your system. And then after that, we paused. Red team got on your system and we paused. And then we followed our protocol here on the red teaming side to verify your ability to get points. So in a normal red teaming, blue teaming competition, what happens is red team gets on your system and they're gonna go hog wild. They're gonna install 100 persistent techniques. They're gonna kick you out. And then they're going to configure the system to keep you out. And that's how a normal red teaming, blue teaming competition works, right? That's usually how it goes. But here at the Cyberforce competition, we don't do that. So what red teaming demonstrated is that we can be trusted to follow the protocol as outlined by the organizers, so we can give you an experience that we're going to run you through these different plays, and we're going to measure you on these different ability skits. And it's not just your ability of keeping red teaming off your system. So like, take a deep breath and know that even though red team is on your system, that is not a bad thing for the Cyberforce competition, right? That enables us to test you on this wide spectrum of ability post initial access. After initial access, so, you know, unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring up once again, right, the MITRE attack framework here, right? So let's pull up this awesome matrix. And if you notice, right, initial access, check out initial access, right? This is initial access. It's a few rows, and in reality, it's probably just like a handful. Some of these other ones more likely for a very advanced adversary, or if you're like a very specific target. But look at all the other categories. There's all these other very important categories that, unless red team has some means of having that access in your system, we can't test you on all this stuff. So that's why it's like kind of a priori, where you assume, hey, we're going to ask you for some means of having initial access, and we're going to use it in a responsible manner so you can actually get points for the competition, right? Completely different mindsets from the other competition. So number one, right, on Friday check-in day, we're going to pop a shell and then ask you to kill it. And then it's like, okay, good. We verified you have that ability. And we verified that we have the ability to get on your systems as well. And we're going to use it in a responsible manner. I think another thing that we're going to ask them to do is we're going to ask blue team, like, okay, on the check-in day, it's like, hey, blue team, I'm going to need to have a shell to do some of these post-exploit techniques. Please give me a shell. So you're going to ask the blue team to actually give you a shell. That's what we're going to do. We're going to ask them for a shell, then blue team will give you a shell in some means, like, okay, now I have a shell. And then you could do some of these post-exploitation stuff, right, to give them points. So I think we're going to do it in that manner just to set the expectations here, right? This isn't very typical red teaming, blue teaming bloodbath where it's just like, you know, a free-for-all. It's just like a purging for the red teaming, right? They have no rules and they're just going in and bashing everyone's face. Like, no, we're not going to act in that way, right? Here, the red team can only give you points, and we're really focused on the other really important aspect of cybersecurity, and not just initial access. We test you on, we verify your ability for initial access on that Friday. We're like, okay, you have that skill, good. Now for the rest of the competition, we're gonna really focus on the other aspects. So, you know, I hope that kind of gives you an idea of like, what's the potential here, right? So let's go, so a big question here was like, okay, what's the evolution of this first 3 hours where there's 0 points? Notice again, right, 0 points. And then later on, when red team will be given information about the vulnerabilities here on these other VMs, right? So this purple playbook right here, okay, I guess that would be the third thing I talk about. So this first area right here, it could potentially be very, very boring for the red team here, because for the good teams here, you're not giving any information about the VMs. You're going to do very typical pen testy stuff, right? Scanning, enumeration, that kind of stuff. For the good teams, they'll have lockdown everything, and then you won't be able to do anything. That is expected. Don't feel bad about yourself, right? That's a very normal situation. So in that case, just focus more on the playbook, right? So now the big question here is this transition, right? So now you're going to be given all of the information. So this is more informed. You're going to be informed of all the vulnerabilities here in the VM, right? So with that information, you can start testing the knowledge. So now it's kind of here in the, it's kind of, you're doing some of this now, right? But it's more free form in terms of you have a lot of, on yourself, you have a lot of decision-making ability in terms of what exactly I believe you want to do, right? So say you're given information about, hey, there's a SQL vulnerability, right? Then, okay, you could then run it and test it, right? But how you kind of validate the information, again, you should do it very similarly to the playbook way, right? Where you're like, hey, I ran this exploit, detect it and mitigate it. Okay, you detect and mitigate, okay, I'm gonna give you full points. But FYI, right, for the good team, what's gonna happen is that even though we give you all the information here, the blue team could have removed that, fixed that vulnerability before even the competition happened. In that case, then it's more about you asking for the right evidence, right? And once again, if they give you the right evidence, like they fixed it properly, even though you as a pen tester wasn't able to exploit it, you would also give them full points. So that's sort of the flow there. If they fixed it and if they give you a proper explanation of it, they get full points. If they didn't fix it, you're able to exploit something, you're able to do something interesting from a red team, you give them an opportunity to get points based on some blue teaming activities in terms of detection or mitigation or recovery, right? And you have some flexibility there. And in that category, I'm hoping some of our volunteers here will come up with some good ideas in that category. So before this recorded session, Jared came up with a really good idea. So hopefully Jared would have that as a potential, not the official playbook, but for a play for the pen testing part, right? Where we're going to like, hey, do that thing that Jared did, and then give them instructions. If it works, give them instructions on how the blue team can get points for that, right? And also, I have a special team right now working on ICS stuff. And I think most of the ICS stuff will also be in this category, where once they come up with these ICS plays, they're going to give it to you, in this portion, and then you would run through that, and then give points accordingly based on how that play is structured. So, some people are very perceptive in terms of, for one VM, the Windows 2016 VM, that's the only one that the blue team is not allowed to modify. All the other VMs in the environment, the blue teams is able to change and modify. That means any type of assumptions we had on these machines for us injecting vulnerabilities or making some configuration changes to get it into a vulnerable state, if any of our assumptions are wrong because the blue team changes in a manner, then those injects will not work. That is a reality. And right, that's a kind of concern. So the only solution I have this year in terms of the way the rule is set up is, in that case, maybe you're going to have to walk the blue team through setting, fixing their environment so the injects will work. So then you could run your play, and then the blue team has an opportunity to get points. I think that's the only way to get around that now this year because of the rule sets we have, right? Because for the most part, blue team is given almost full control of modifications. So that's something that they need to keep in mind, right? That's kind of the unfortunate reality of when you give that flexibility to blue teams. For me personally, maybe the right balance next year is to have something in the middle where the blue teams is not allowed to change some very important stuff that we need to do our injects, but other stuff they can change any way they want, right? So I think maybe we have some balance there. That would be really good. So on the bright side though, one of the things that we do have in our power is on check-in day, we can specify a set of ports, or maybe we can broaden that to a set of configurations that they have to do with their VMs on check-in day, for their environment to be set for for opportunities to score full points on the game day on Saturday, right? So if you have a good suggestions, there's open ports that need to have open and certain configurations you need for some of the injects, let me know, and if it makes sense, I will add it to the official requirements. So then we can make blue team do that in the score check-in day. So that's another tool that we have in our bag. So that's to keep in mind. So let's quickly go through some of the questions here, right? So configuration changes, right? So turning on Defender, firewall, and those kind of things. So it depends. I think you can do those kind of things, but don't turn that into, so, there was a question in terms of, hey, can you do that? You can do that, but don't make the competition completely about that, right? Who's the fastest to turn on and off the firewall? And then, you and the blue team spending, 5 hours of the competition just turning off the firewall. That's not interesting. So maybe do that for, 10 minutes to 30 minutes. And if it's like, okay, that's just this rat race, this cat and mouse game of you turning on off firewall, then just say, depending on the situation, just tell them like, okay, I'm going to give you points because I know you could turn on the firewall. Now we're not going to test you anymore. But if you need to have them turn off have the firewall be off so you could run some of these other plays, then inform them of that, right? In terms of, hey, I need to run these other plays here for this pen testing, and then for me to do that, I'm going to have to turn off your firewall. And FYI, I'm not going to dock you. But FYI, if I could do these plays and then test your ability to figure out the plays, then you could get points, right? Then you could do something like that. Okay, so about defacement, So okay, the rules here is it depends. So so there's a question about trolling. Yeah, so the question about trolling, right? So for me, it depends. So for me, I think consent is a really big thing that we should think about, and also bullying. Bullying is another big thing about, right? So one of our rules is the red team will only go at a pace that is in line with the capabilities of the blue team. So if you see that your blue team doesn't even know how to do a firewall rule, they don't even know the basics of account management, right? And you are going with some very advanced memory only persistent stuff. You're just like way over the head of the blue team. That's way above and beyond what you should be doing for that blue team. In that case, you're probably gonna have to do more of a really mentoring purple teaming approach just to help them learn the basics if that was your team, right? But if you have a really good team and they feel like they're comfortable and they're okay with it, and again, this is the power of our score chat, right? You can put in the score chat, hey, are you cool if I do attacks that are along this line? And the blue team's like, yeah, I'm cool. I can handle it. Do those kind of things. And it's like, okay, I got consent for my blue team. Go ahead and do it. But overall, my guideline is number one, keep it professional and make sure it doesn't get in the way of the lessons we were trying to have the blue team learn, right? For instance, if I have a really good lateral movement technique that enables me to completely get on a machine and totally own it, right? The goal for here in Cyberforce, we want the blue team to learn that. So if someone were to use that mechanism, they use this lateral movement, they're on this machine, they have complete admin access there, right? They don't hose it. They don't kick off the blue team. What they do is they'll sit there for a while and then they're going to see if the blue team figures it out. And if they don't, then they can start giving clues to the blue teams like, hey, I'm on your system here. Do you know why? And it's like, so instead, right, in normal competition, blue team would just kill your connection and maybe put a firewall rule, right, and completely block you off and never learn that lesson at all, right? But here, the way we're structuring is, okay, you're using this super cutting edge technique. Barely anyone's know about, only a few red teamers. You're on their system and you're waiting there. And you're like, hey, blue team, FYI, I'm here. Figure out how I'm doing this. And they don't have a clue. And then you're like, it has to do something with a configuration with your registry settings or something like that, right? And they're like, oh, okay. And then they start digging there and they're getting closer, but they're still not, then you give them more clues, right? And then they're like, and then eventually maybe they'll get it, or maybe you'll give them a link. It's like, this is what it is, right? Oh, okay. And there's like, now figure out how you can mitigate or detect or something like that. And then based on that, you would give them points and check out what happened, right? Now they learn a new technique, right? You help them learn something versus, or even check the log files. So in prior competitions, what happens, the blue team gets on, the red team gets on, kicks off the blue team, and then makes it impossible for the blue team to even get on and look at the log files. And then it's like, wow, there's zero learning opportunity there, right? So in Cyberforce, we're about creating these environments so blue team can learn versus just being very trollish. So back to the question about trolling, if it doesn't get in the way, so what I mean there is like, say you have some very important ransomware attack, right? So instead of ransomwaring the important directories or the entire system, you would ransomware maybe a directory that, okay, this directory of files shows that it works and shows that the blue team needs to figure out techniques of how to mitigate it or recover from it, but it doesn't stop them from learning or doing other aspects of the red team and blue team competition, right? So it doesn't take them entirely out of the game or make the whole system inoperable. So so that's what I say about the defacement, the trolling. That's another example. And I would prefer if it's tasteful, right? So good natured. So make sure it's just good natured, fun, and tasteful, and it doesn't get in the way of what the blue team needs to do to solve the challenge, right? So the challenge here is they need to get to some important component and do a configuration change, right? If you were a troll, you would remap the keyboard, move these files around and just make it painful and annoying for the blue team versus just something that is just lighthearted and it's just fun and both people can get a laugh out of, or you don't touch their path to the solution at all, which what we're trying to do here, right? Because again, our number one priority is learning, so we're making sure that the path for them to get the solution and the full points is not being blocked based on our trollish behavior. So I hope that kind of is some good guidelines of what we want to abide by. because at the end of the day, I think this is one of the sad stuff about the history of red teaming and pen testing in our industry wide, right? So, you know, in the early 2000s, when pen testing and eventually red teaming evolved, the red teamers were seen as the enemies. Defenders hated the red team. They're like, oh, those are the red teamers. Like, look at them. They were very wary and distrustful of the red team, and they made it really hard in terms of giving the red team what they needed to do to help improve the security of the actual organization, right? And they would do something that was very unethical from a blue teamer perspective, just so they could win against the red team, right? That happens in the real world. It still does happen. But luckily, due to the evolution of purple teaming and just a different movement within the red team community, is like, hey, we're about making the blue team better. That's what our goal is. And we have to make a culture where there's trust between the blue teaming and the red team, so red team can actually make blue teaming better, right? So based on those initiatives, I'm seeing a change there, but there's still some of that bad blood history where, you know, when defenders see red teamers out in the professional, right? Oh, look, it's those dirty red teamers. You can't trust them, blah, blah, blah. And that's really sad because I feel like the skill sets and what we're able to do can bring a lot of value to the blue teamer if the relationship was structured in a manner so we can maximize that value, right? Versus it's just a pissing competition where we're just proving how awesome we are at the expense of the blue team versus we're making the blue team better. Those are two completely opposite things. And unfortunately, the traditional culture, the history of red teamers, it's been more about proving how awesome you are to other red teamers and your success based on the expense of the blue team versus, hey, we're here to make the blue teamers better, right? That's a completely different mindset and approach. So yeah, that's what I have to say in terms of the defacement type stuff. You can do a little bit about it, keep it tasteful, keep it good natured, right? We want to make this a welcoming community. Other points I want to say about that, we have a huge shortage of cybersecurity people, right? Or enough people entering our workforce in cybersecurity. And if we're like being complete jerks to them, if that was their first experience of the information security red teaming community, that could potentially turn them off, right? So we want to make a positive, a good place. So a lot of those people who might be intimidated will be more open to joining our community and helping us out because we don't have enough people in cybersecurity here. Okay, I think those are the big points I wanted to cover with some of this scoring stuff that I wanted to share publicly with also the blue team. Let me see, I'm just really quickly going through the comments here to make sure there was no other big questions here. Thank you. Yeah, David's right here, right? So, you know, quoted from me, but every attack should have a lesson. It's like, what's the lesson here? In terms of if it's a scored attack, what is a lesson here? So some of the stuff I said earlier, right? You can do some really cool process migration stuff, right? You can do some really cool ROP, you know, in terms of if you're writing exploits for vulnerabilities, you can do some very powerful techniques using ROP. But for a defender here, according to the level of complexity here for the Cyberforce competition, you could do a really amazing ROP shellcode, but it's like, is there a lesson here? It sounds really good to share that information with other red teamers, but for the competition itself, for the points, I can't come up currently with a good play for that. So those things you can still do, but we can't score them on because we can't come up with a good play for it. So again, for the stuff that we're scoring the blue team, it has to be what is a blue teaming lesson here that we're trying to impart. So with that, unless there's any other questions or comments on this topic, we're going to end this segment and then move on to other stuff on our agenda.